I haven't quite responded to some of the Facebook comments on my post and your post. We'll do that tomorrow regarding Freedom Day. That's another whole conversation, right? But good talking to you. I'm quite curious about this. We know that the president met up with members of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies a few days ago. But we also know that the president, attended an iftar in Cape Town last year. I don't think this is happening this year. I'm not too sure. And therefore, this just gets me thinking about your understanding in particular about the relationships between, the head of a country, the head of state, with various, let's say, minority groups, and some of them are purely religious or ethnic. Some of them are obviously political hotheads as well in terms of where they come from. Well, what is your take on that?
Well, on the one hand, Ashraf, I think it's great that we have a president who can be accessible to different constituencies within the country for whatever reason. So I think that's a good thing. Certainly in some instances, those kinds of things are used for electioneering, etc. But the fact that the president is willing to sit and have supper or iftar, in the case that you're mentioning, with the people of a particular community and listen to what they have to say, is always a good thing. Of course, what seems to be on the face of it, accessibility, is not necessarily always the case. We know with heads of states all over the world that many of these things can also be staged. I'm not saying that the iftar was staged, for example, but that the accessibility is carefully managed. So yes, there will be an iftar in Ramadan, so that it can be shown that the president is able to meet with and talk to people within the Muslim community, and other such things with other communities. With regards to the meeting a few days ago with the Jewish Board of Deputies, I think that there's lots of questions that need to be asked about that meeting, particularly considering that the Jewish Board of Deputies has been extremely critical in the recent past about South Africa's position on Israeli apartheid crimes, and particularly vicious. Not only the Board of Deputies, but also, for example, the Jewish Report, particularly vicious against Minister Naledi Pandor, our foreign minister, recently Mandla Mandela, who was in the South African Jewish Report referred to as anti-Semitic and hate speech, etc. I was at the conference where he spoke. I know exactly what he said. So within this kind of context, this meeting with the Jewish Board of Deputies does raise some questions. It also raises additional questions. It raises questions in terms of the content, what was discussed, and if the president is accessible to people, he should also be transparent. And we'd like to know what was discussed.
And it's interesting. Naeem, am I right in saying there's very little information that's come out of what has been discussed? Because that's a bit different to President Ramaphosa attending last year's, iftar or Buka celebration in Cape Town, where it was very much part of a religious gathering. I understand the political connotations, but here this was a meeting that took place, including, of course, the National Security Advisor, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So this was a meeting. It wasn't in public like the iftar was, where anyone could, listen in on what was being spoken about by anyone with the president. It was at his house. It wasn't in a mosque or in a synagogue, and clearly it wasn't just a meeting with representatives of a religious community or what you call the minority community. The fact that the National Security Advisor Sidney Mufamadi was present means that there was something more to it, something political, something security related. And one can only imagine that this had to do with South Africa's position on the Palestinian issue and on Israel. Why otherwise would he have been present? Of course, if it's got to do with Israel, one might also ask the question why the Minister Naledi Pandor wasn't present. And I think
because of foreign relations, right? Yeah.
she is foreign relations. So if it's going to deal with Israel, well, she's in charge of it. Number one. Number two, she's been making all of the statements recently, not Sydney Mufamadi. Of course, Sydney Mufamadi, if it is to deal with Israel, then it does fall within his mandate. And I think a couple of reasons why the president might not have wanted Naledi Pandor there. One is that perhaps he didn't want a kind of red flag to a Zionist bull in the meeting, and he wanted them to complain to him about her without her being there, having to defend herself, perhaps. But this is all speculation. We'd like to know what happened at the meeting.
Okay, well, you're quite right. It is speculation. So, in the absence of a formal statement, because often when these meetings, even these type of meetings take place, even for example, a Malema visiting Zuma, right? That sort of thing. Inevitably, there's some pronouncements, both from the Malema side and the Zuma side. So in this case, besides the picture taken, you'd expect some pronouncements on both sides, because each one would want to push their reasons and their gains that came out of those meetings, isn't it?
Well, of course, we have no expectation, nor are we owed any explanation by the Board of Deputies. They're not answerable to the South African public. They're answerable to whatever their constituency might be. But the presidency is answerable to the South African public. Certainly the president has meetings with lots of people that are not, they don't issue a statement about, etc. But if there is a call for an explanation, then he is duty bound to provide an explanation. Unless, there's some argument made that this is of a matter of national security, which I find very difficult. But they haven't made any excuse for why no report has been given, no explanation has been given. If I'm not mistaken, the pictures that we see were pictures that were issued by the Jewish Board of Deputies, not by the presidency. So I think that we are owed an explanation, certainly in light of the kinds of positions that the South African government has been taking on the Palestinian-Israeli issue. We'd like to know what was discussed and how it fits in with the stated positions of the government.
And I suppose, the general issue is that South Africa, as a country or government, and the ruling party, the ANC, has been very much on side regarding the Palestinian issue and upholding the Palestinian cause, absolutely. But on the other hand, there's been occasions of mellowing in terms of, South African presence in Israel by an embassy, yes, no. So that's been ongoing, right? But generally, and you made the point earlier on, that South Africa certainly has drawn criticism from Israel and certainly organizations like the South African Jewish Board of Deputies because of their particular stance, right? Now, there's a flip side to that, which is there would be some critics in South Africa who would feel that why even talk to the South African Jewish Board of Deputies in the first place as the president of the country, even keeping in mind that you possibly disagree vehemently on the issues of Israel and Palestine.
Look, there have been, after these photographs have been issued, there have been a number of comments from people within the Palestine Solidarity Movement. These comments include, for example, why should the president even be talking to the Zionists? Secondly, we, the members of the Solidarity Movement have said we have difficulty even getting a meeting with the minister. Yet it seems that the Jewish Board of Deputies can just get a meeting with the president at the drop of a hat. Now, whether that second one is true or not, I'm not sure. But in terms of the first one, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies are not Israelis. They're not foreigners. They're South Africans. They represent a constituency that is South African. Even if sometimes it might seem like they're pushing an agenda that's a foreign one, but their constituents are South Africans. And so from that perspective, there's nothing wrong with the president meeting South African citizens who have issues that they want to raise with him. And that's why I said, the idea that we might have a president who is very accessible to various constituencies within the country is a good thing. The question is whether he actually is, or is the complaint by some in the solidarity movement that we would never be able to, the solidarity movement would never be able to get a meeting with the president, but the Jewish Board of Deputies can easily do so. Is that correct or not? I think that maybe this is a challenge for the groups such as the SABDS coalition, that they should ask for a meeting with the president and see whether it's turned down or whether they get it as quickly as the Jewish Board of Deputies did.
And when last, if they have, when last has that solidarity movement met with the president?
As far as I know, never. They have met with I know the South African BDS coalition, which represents a few dozen solidarity organizations from across the country. They have met with Minister Naledi Pandor, but no, they've not got a meeting with the president.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Which then just goes back to the broader conversation then about your thoughts on the role of political parties and the president of the country reaching out to different communities. Now, this is not so much about the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, but across the board, including visiting Muslim events, visiting Jewish events, visiting Hindu ceremonies, etc. What's your thoughts again about that in a country that is largely secular but predominantly Christian?
Well, South Africa is a secular country, but we have a particular understanding of what secular means in the South African context. I mean, the preamble to our constitution mentions God. Our national anthem mentions God and beseeches God to protect us. So the South African understanding of a secular state is not that religion has no role to play in the state. It is that the state remains equidistant from all religious or all faith traditions, which is in a sense a very positive approach towards religion rather than a negative one. And it's a good approach, particularly because South Africa is in general a very religious country, not just Christians, but across the board. We hear these comments even from foreign Muslims, foreign Christians, etc., who come to visit and seem quite surprised. So that the president of the country or ministers, etc., meet with faith communities or meet with communities of or meet with representatives of other interest groups, disabled people, whatever the case might be, I think is a good thing. As I said, that our leadership should be willing to listen to what people on the ground have to say, even if those are small constituencies, I think is very important. Again, the question might be asked, well, does the president really listen to community or representatives of really poor communities? He seems to meet quite often with business people, but does he meet with people representing the poor? And that's a valid question. I don't think that he meets with people in Alex or Soweto or Kailicha as much as he meets with business leaders.
Okay, I found it interesting. Yesterday, for example, Duduzane Zuma now positioning himself to get elected on the ANC national platform. In fact, was dishing out Ramadan meals to a whole lot of Muslims in KZN. And some may say the same about him. About what does that mean? In the past, you could have the DA doing the same thing. I don't know. What do you read into all of that?
Look, I think Duduzane Zuma is very much an opportunist. Just not too long ago, he made comments supporting Israel. Now he's dishing out. I mean, if you live in KwaZulu-Natal, you know that the biggest and most effective aid that is being distributed is by organizations from the Muslim community. The largest, of course, everyone knows, is Gift of the Givers, but others as well. So, well, if you want to be seen to be involved in something that is a huge crisis at the moment, something for which no one trusts the government, no one in KZN trusts the government to be able to do the job well, then this is a great opportunity. If you're from the opposition, in a sense, and you want to get in. And where do you get in? Well, let's find a Muslim organization, because they are the ones that are most seen, because they seem to be the most effective. So yeah, it's a good photo opportunity, and I think he took it.
And lastly, uh, in your experience over the years, Naeem, when you have the leaders of a country, in this case now President Ramaphosa, but going back to say former President Nelson Mandela, when they would interact with religious and community-based groups, I mean, are you able to give us an insight in terms of whether there are gains for that community? Because why I'm saying that is there's a sense from many people, and I know, and we'll talk about the Brixton Mosque tomorrow, that, for example, Mandela coming to that Idgar long, long time ago, and I was present, of course, you were there. For many people, it's like, you see, now he's listening to us, we'll get what we want. I mean, do you get a sense over a period that communities, when the president of a country visits upon them, that they can elicit gains for their own benefit?
Yes, I think they can. Look, I mean, the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, of course, is that these things happen just before elections in order to get votes. But the best case scenario is that there is a sincerity that the head of state, or whoever the senior leadership might be, interacts with these communities in order to properly listen and engage. I've been in many such meetings. I remember meetings where the present meetings with the Muslim community, for example, half a dozen ministers, a few deputy ministers, a few DGs. And it's an engagement, 2 or 3 hours of listening to what these representatives of the Muslim community have to say about how they think, one, the country is governed, secondly, how they think that the state and the government responds to what is important to them, and then they're responding. And sometimes there's agreement, sometimes there isn't agreement. And of course, the fact is that government is supposed to be governing and representing all citizens of the country. So they would listen to a community like the Muslim community, which is 2% of the population. But it doesn't mean that you get everything that you would like to get, because those things have to be balanced, of course, with other interests as well. But certainly, I believe that there is benefit in those kind of engagements. At the very least, the two sides get to understand where each other is coming from. But for a community like the Muslim community, yes, there can be gains.
Okay, well, for fascinating conversation with you, Naeem Jinnah, most appreciated. I suppose the big issue right now, and it probably goes to the SABDS coalition, is as a letter to the president to say, dear Mr. President, what was the outcome and what's the purpose of that meeting with the South African Jewish Board of Deputies? Looking forward to that answer if and when you get it. But Naeem Jinnah, from the executive director of the Afro Middle East Center, appreciate your time. Thank you for those insights, and salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
There we are, fascinating and understanding to a degree, what happens with political leadership, both of a country, and I think a leader of a country, the president, absolutely would speak to all citizens on the one hand, but then you also get the party political leaders, and that is across the board, and how they somehow meet up with communities and what comes out of those type of conversations. So hopefully we should now be able to connect with Lorenzo Davis. But by the way, regarding the conversation with Naeem, feel free to post comments on the Salam Media social media pages. We'll look out for those. Lorenzo Davis, hopefully right after this.